My name is Isabella Morales, though everyone calls me Ivy. I am 58 years old, a widow, and once served as a reserve deputy. These days I work nights as a security officer, a job that keeps my discipline sharp and my instincts alive. At my age, you might expect my nights to be quiet, filled with books and tea, but life has a way of breaking the silence when you least expect it. It was exactly 2 a.m. when I first heard the knock. Not gentle, not hesitant. The kind of knock that slices through the quiet like a blade. I had just returned from a late shift, still in half of my uniform, my badge resting on the dresser. The house was hushed, the clock ticking steadily in the background, and then, without warning, the pounding began. I froze for a moment, listening. Years of training kicked in. I moved toward the door, my heart steady but alert. When I opened it, the night air rushed in, sharp and cold. There, collapsing against the frame, was my daughter, Layla. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her hands trembling. The moonlight revealed bruises along her jaw, and her breath came out in shallow gasps. She whispered, barely able to form the words, "Mom." Derek kicked me out of the villa, our $3 million villa, for his mistress. Her voice cracked, and then she fell into my arms. I caught her, feeling the weight of her pain and fear, heavier than her body itself. In that instant, I did not speak. I didn't ask questions or cry out. I just held her, the cold air wrapping around us like a second skin. A knock had broken the silence, and in that moment, my world shifted. If you've ever been blindsided by betrayal, if you've ever watched someone you love collapse at your doorstep in the dead of night, you will understand why I could never forget that hour. And if you want to know how a mother like me chose to act, not with rage, but with quiet resolve, stay with me. There's more to this story than heartbreak. It is about a promise, a plan, and the kind of justice that speaks louder than vengeance. So if stories of strength and survival matter to you, I invite you to follow along and perhaps even share it with someone who needs a reminder. It's never too late to reclaim what was lost. I pulled Layla inside, guiding her carefully to the couch. She was shivering, though the night wasn't that cold. Her whole body seemed to carry the chill of exile, the kind that seeps in when someone you trust throws you out like you never belonged. She clutched my sleeve, her nails digging into the fabric as if she feared I might let go. I stroked her hair gently, whispering, "You're safe now. You're home." Her sobs quieted, but the words she had spoken still echoed in my chest. Derek had cast her out of the villa her father once dreamed of for her, the home that represented our family's legacy, and worse, he had done it for a mistress. The thought made my jaw tighten. I could almost hear my late husband's voice in my head urging me to stand firm. He had always told me, protect her no matter what. As I fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, Layla tried to explain between broken breaths. Derek had been seeing another woman for months, someone younger, reckless, and loud. Tonight, after a vicious argument, he had shoved her toward the door, shouting that the villa was no longer hers. He told her to leave, to make space for the mistress he intended to bring in. The cruel audacity of it churned in my stomach. Layla's words faded into soft sobs, and I could see how exhaustion threatened to consume her. I pressed a warm cup of water into her hands, urging her to sip slowly. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking, "he's taken everything. He said if I spoke to anyone, he would make sure I had nothing left." I crouched beside her, steadying her trembling hands. "Listen to me," I said firmly. "You have not lost everything. You still have me, and as long as I'm breathing, you will never be without a home." Her eyes filled again, though this time with something gentler than despair. Perhaps it was relief, perhaps disbelief. I didn't need her to speak. I only needed her to know. I rose to my feet and walked quietly to the dresser where my badge and folded uniform lay. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the badge, the fabric worn by years of service. I had not worn it in a long time, not officially, but its meaning had never left me. It was more than authority. It was a reminder of who I was and the oath I had once taken. I glanced back at Layla, wrapped in the blanket, her head resting heavily against the cushions. She had fought so hard to keep her marriage alive, believing love could fix what cruelty had corroded. Now she was broken, but not beyond repair, and I would be the one to see her restored. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the calm before action, the pause before a storm. I could feel the plan taking shape in my mind, the same plan I had whispered to myself long ago. I didn't tell Layla all of it yet. She needed rest and I needed clarity. I stepped closer, tucking the blanket tighter around her. "Sleep," I said softly. "We'll face him in the morning." Her breathing slowed, steadied. I stood watch, my hand resting on the badge in my pocket. In my silence, I made a vow, not only to my daughter, but to the memory of the man who once stood by my side. Justice would come, not with chaos, but with precision. And when the time was right, Derek would realize he had underestimated the wrong woman. That night at 2 a.m., everything changed. When the house finally settled into silence again, I lingered in the dim glow of the hallway lamp. Layla was asleep on the couch, her breathing steady though uneven at times, like her body was still bracing for blows, even in dreams. I pulled a chair near her side and sat for a while, watching her chest rise and fall, listening to the fragile rhythm of her survival. The bruises across her skin haunted me, but more than that, it was the look in her eyes before she closed them. Shame, as if she had failed. My daughter believed she was broken, but I knew she wasn't. She was standing at the edge of something, not the end. I rose quietly and walked back to my bedroom. On the dresser, where I had left it untouched for months, my uniform waited. The navy blue fabric folded neatly, the polished badge resting above it, the holster empty but familiar. I reached out, running my fingers over the cloth. It smelled faintly of starch and time, of nights I had spent on patrol, of duty that had shaped me long before this battle. I pulled the uniform jacket onto my shoulders. It was snugger than I remembered, the weight pressing into me like an old friend. I looked into the mirror, and for a moment I didn't see a tired widow with strands of silver hair. I saw Deputy Isabella Morales, the woman who once swore to uphold the law, to protect and serve. And though I was no longer on the active roster, that oath was never truly retired. It lived inside me. The badge gleamed in the soft light, catching my reflection. I picked it up, holding it in the palm of my hand. My late husband had watched me pin it on countless times, always with that proud smile. He used to tease me, saying, "You married the law before you married me." But he understood. He admired that my discipline wasn't just about rules. It was about love, about safeguarding those who could not defend themselves. I remembered the last night I wore this uniform while he was still alive. He had come into the bedroom as I buttoned the jacket, leaned against the doorway, and said, "Promise me one thing, Ivy. Promise me you'll never let our daughter stand alone. No matter how far she drifts, no matter what mistakes she makes, stand beside her." I had placed my hand over his, strong and calloused from years of carpentry, and whispered, "I promise." That promise was the last sacred thread between us, the one vow I had carried beyond the grave. Tonight, as I looked at Layla's bruised face in my memory, that vow surged through me like blood itself. I fastened the badge to my chest, the metal cold against my heart. I slid the holster onto my hip and placed my old sidearm inside. It had been cleaned and oiled, though I rarely touched it anymore. I wasn't arming myself for violence. I was reminding myself of who I was, of what I could still do. I paced slowly through the hallway, my boots quiet against the wooden floor. Every photo on the wall seemed to watch me. Pictures of Layla as a child, her laughter frozen in frames, her father's arm draped around both of us. They were witnesses to this moment, to my silent vow renewed. When I stepped back into the living room, I stood over my daughter. She stirred lightly, shifting beneath the blanket. Her lips moved, whispering something inaudible. I knelt and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You are not alone," I whispered, words meant for her ears even if her dreams swallowed them. Then I moved to the dining table and opened the locked drawer where I kept an old folder. Inside were pages I had collected over the years, notes about Derek's suspicious finances, odd discrepancies I had seen but never had enough reason to act upon. At the time, I had told myself it wasn't my fight, that Layla loved him, and I had to respect that. But tonight proved what I had known in my gut all along. He was a parasite, and parasites only stop when cut off from their host. I laid the folder flat, spreading out the documents, receipts, and a USB drive where I had stored fragments of information. My hands moved with precision, each detail falling into place like pieces of a puzzle. My training returned to me with ease. It was no longer a distant memory. It was alive again, guiding me. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. The neighborhood outside was still, only the rustle of leaves breaking the quiet. I stood in the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window. My reflection in the glass showed the uniformed figure I had been, the figure I had become again. And then I whispered the words that sealed my resolve, the words I had carried for years without speaking. Execute the plan. It wasn't said with anger. It wasn't said with vengeance. It was said with calm certainty, like a soldier receiving orders she already understood. The plan was not chaos. It was order, not rage. It was justice. I returned to the couch and sat once more beside Layla. She stirred faintly, her body curling tighter into the blanket. I rested my hand on her shoulder, steady and protective. Whatever came next, she wouldn't walk through it alone. The night had tested me, but it had also given me clarity. This was not just about reclaiming a villa or punishing a cruel man. It was about fulfilling a promise made to the man I loved, about guarding the daughter who carried his eyes and his spirit. It was about proving that silence in the face of abuse was never the answer. Action was. I leaned back in the chair, eyes heavy but spirit alert, and let the darkness stretch around us. Tomorrow would bring doctors, lawyers, evidence, and battles. But tonight, I had already taken the first step. The uniform was on my back, the badge over my heart, and the oath alive again in my soul. At 2 a.m., my daughter had collapsed in front of me. By 3 a.m., I had risen. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, I was already driving through the empty streets with Layla curled in the passenger seat. She leaned against the window, her face pale under the faint glow of the dashboard lights. Every bump in the road made her wince, though she tried to hide it. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near hers, steadying her with my presence, if not my touch. She didn't need questions now. She needed action. The hospital emergency room was quiet when we arrived, though the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. I parked near the entrance and helped her out of the car. She stumbled, clutching my arm for balance. The fluorescent lights above us hummed as we entered through the automatic doors, the sterile chill of the hospital wrapping around us. Nurses at the desk glanced up, their eyes catching on the bruises across her jaw, the swelling near her ribs, the tear tracks still drying on her cheeks. "Patient intake," one of them said gently, reaching for a clipboard. But I shook my head and stated firmly, "She needs a doctor now. ER. No delays." There must have been something in my voice, something sharpened by years of command because they moved quickly. Within minutes, a nurse was guiding us through the double doors, where the world narrowed into curtained-off bays and the muted beeps of machines. Dr. Marisol Vega appeared, her dark hair tied back, her eyes sharp with concern. She looked at me, then at Layla. "Tell me what happened," she asked. "She fell," Layla muttered weakly, but the doctor's gaze shifted to me. I shook my head. "No, she was assaulted. Her husband." My voice was firm, unflinching. Layla tried to protest, but I held her hand, grounding her. "You don't have to protect him anymore," I whispered. Dr. Vega nodded slightly, understanding, and began her examination. She spoke calmly, noting each injury aloud for the nurse. Contusion to the left cheek, swelling near the jawline, possible rib fracture, bruising along the upper arms consistent with forceful restraint. With every word, my chest tightened, but I forced myself to listen, to remember. These were not just wounds, they were evidence. She turned to me and asked, "Do you want photographs for documentation?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Everything." The nurse retrieved a hospital camera, capturing each bruise in harsh, clinical light. Layla winced at the flashes, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I squeezed her hand, whispering, "This isn't for shame. This is for truth." While the doctor pressed gently against Layla's ribs, testing for fractures, I pulled my phone from my pocket. On the screen, a list of missed calls blinked. 12 from Derek. Beneath them, a series of messages appeared, each one darker than the last. "Answer me. Don't you dare run to your mother. You'll regret this. That house is mine now. Keep quiet or I'll make sure you lose more than just a villa." I felt the cold fury rise inside me, but I pressed the phone to my chest, keeping my face calm. Layla didn't need to see those words yet. What mattered was the record. I forwarded the messages to my secure folder, labeling them alongside the photos the nurse had taken. Dr. Vega stepped back after the examination. "She'll need x-rays to rule out fractures, but she's stable. No internal bleeding as far as I can tell. I'll prescribe something for the pain and swelling, but rest will be crucial, and she should not return to him." "She won't," I said, my voice steel. "Not ever again." Layla looked at me then, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe I meant it. She had spent years convinced she was trapped, tethered to Derek's power, but tonight was different. Tonight I was drawing a line she could not yet draw for herself. As the nurse wrapped her ribs with gentle precision, Dr. Vega handed me a folder. "Medical report preliminary. I'll finalize it after the scans, but this will help if you decide to pursue legal action." I took it with a nod, sliding it into my bag alongside the documents I had gathered earlier. Chain of custody began here, in this sterile room under the hum of fluorescent lights. When Layla was wheeled out of radiology an hour later, she looked exhausted but calmer. The swelling had been treated with ice, the bruises bandaged where needed. She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling less than before. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think we can win against him?" I bent closer, my forehead nearly touching hers. "This isn't about winning, Layla. This is about truth, and the truth has a way of standing even when men like Derek try to bury it." She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from the faintest spark of hope. As we left the ER, the early morning light spilled across the parking lot, soft and gray. I guided her into the car carefully, settling her with pillows I had taken from home. Before starting the engine, I glanced back at the hospital entrance. Inside those walls, our first layer of evidence now lived. Medical testimony, photographs, reports. It was the beginning of a foundation Derek could not so easily topple. I adjusted the mirror, watching Layla drift into a fragile sleep, then tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Derek thought he had silenced her at 2 a.m. when he cast her out of that villa. He thought shame and fear would keep her quiet. But I was her mother, and I knew silence was not our fate. The plan was no longer a thought whispered in the night. It was alive, growing stronger with every page of evidence, every breath my daughter took in defiance of his cruelty. And as I drove us home, The badge in my pocket pressed against my side like a reminder. This was only the beginning. The morning air was heavy with the smell of damp earth as I pulled the car into our driveway. Layla stirred awake, her eyes still swollen from tears and lack of rest. She whispered a faint "thank you" when I helped her inside, her voice hoarse, worn from both crying and pleading with a man who no longer deserved to be called her husband. I settled her into bed and pulled the curtains to block the light. She needed silence and darkness now, a cocoon where her body could begin to heal. I moved quietly through the kitchen, made coffee, and let the steam rise into my face. The fatigue from the night weighed on me, but I knew I couldn't rest yet. Every hour mattered. Evidence fades, memories blur, and fear grows louder when left unattended. Derek counted on all of that, but I had learned long ago that the truth leaves trails, and sometimes those trails are caught by eyes other than our own. My thoughts went to Lydia Grant, the woman who lived across the street. A widow like me, she had been both friend and occasional confidant. Lydia had once told me her security cameras never slept, that they were her silent guardians when the nights grew too long. At 2 a.m, when my daughter collapsed at my door, Lydia's cameras might have seen more than even I had. I slipped back into my jacket and crossed the street. Lydia opened the door before I knocked, as if she had been expecting me. Her kind eyes softened when she saw my face. "Ivy," she said gently, "I heard the commotion last night. Is Layla all right?" I swallowed, my throat tightening. "She's hurt, but she's safe. Lydia, I need to ask something of you. Do you still keep your cameras running?" She nodded immediately. "Every night, without fail. Do you think they caught something?" "I believe they did," I replied, lowering my voice. "The moment she arrived. I need that footage." Without hesitation, Lydia stepped aside and gestured for me to follow. Her living room was warm and filled with the smell of cinnamon candles. She led me to her desk, where the monitor glowed faintly. With a few keystrokes, she pulled up the feed from the night before. My chest tightened as I watched the clock tick toward 2:01 a.m. On the screen, there it was, my front porch bathed in the dim glow of a street lamp. The figure of my daughter stumbled into frame, her hands pounding weakly against the door. Even through the grainy lens, the desperation was clear. Her body folded in on itself as she cried, her voice carrying faintly through the microphone Lydia had installed along with the camera. "Please, Mom, open the door. He threw me out." The sound hollowed me. Even though I had lived it, even though I had opened that door and held her in my arms, hearing it from the outside pierced me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Lydia pressed a tissue into my hand, and I realized tears had slipped down my cheeks. "This is proof," I said quietly, forcing my voice steady. "Proof she was forced out, proof she had nowhere else to go." Lydia nodded. "I'll export the file for you. Do you want the raw footage or a copy?" "Both," I answered, "the raw file for the chain of custody and a copy to store safely." She worked silently, her fingers quick on the keyboard. Within minutes, 2 USB drives lay on the desk. I picked them up, feeling their small weight as if they carried more than data, as if they carried the truth itself. Before I left, Lydia touched my arm. "You're not alone in this, Ivy. If you need me to testify, I will." I saw her crying. I heard her voice. "No one can twist that." I looked into her eyes and felt gratitude swell within me. Community had been something Derek tried to use against us, twisting neighbors with his charm and false respectability. But here, across the street, was someone who saw through him. "Thank you," I whispered. "When the time comes, your voice will matter." Back home, I slipped quietly into my study. Layla was still sleeping, her face calm at last. I placed one USB drive into a locked box and labeled it with the date and time. The other I added to the folder with the medical report, the photographs, and Derek's threatening messages. The file was growing, each piece another brick in the wall we would build against him. For a moment, I sat at the desk and closed my eyes. I could still hear Layla's cries through Lydia's speakers, still see her pounding fists against my door. But now, those cries were no longer just a mother's memory. They were recorded, preserved, undeniable. When I stood, I felt a new steadiness in my spine. Derek could spread his lies, paint himself as the victim, charm the church, and parade his charity. But truth had a way of breaking masks, and with every piece of evidence, his mask grew thinner. I stepped into Layla's room once more. She stirred, her eyes opening halfway. "Mom," she murmured, "what time is it?" "Morning," I said softly. "You're safe. Sleep a little longer." She closed her eyes again, and I brushed her hair back from her forehead. Outside, the neighborhood stirred awake with the ordinary hum of life. Dogs barking, sprinklers ticking, engines starting. But inside my home, something extraordinary had begun. The fight for justice had taken root, and it was already growing. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and whispered into the quiet, "Step by step, we'll bring him down." By the time Layla finally stirred from her long sleep, the sun was already leaning past noon, painting warm stripes across the living room floor. She blinked awake, her eyes swollen but softer now, as if her body had begun to believe in safety again. I was sitting nearby, a stack of papers and a laptop open in front of me. She shifted under the blanket and whispered, "Mom, you're still up?" "I never left," I said gently. "You needed rest. I needed to prepare." Her gaze flickered toward the files on the table. "Prepare for what?" "For the fight he doesn't know is coming," I answered. I spoke quietly, but my words carried steel. Layla looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. Shame still clung to her, though it was not hers to carry. "You don't have to face this alone anymore. I have a plan, and it starts now." She didn't argue, though her eyes brimmed with tears. I reached across the table and touched her hand. "Drink some water, eat a little something, then let me do the work. Justice isn't just decided in a courtroom. It's built, brick by brick, with evidence no one can tear apart." After making sure she was settled with a bowl of soup, I gathered the folder that was growing heavier each hour. The medical report from Dr. Vega, the photos of her bruises, Derek's threatening messages, and now the footage from Lydia's camera. Each piece had its place. Each piece was part of the truth. But truth needed a voice, someone who could weave it into the language of the law. That was when I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had kept for years. "Ethan Cole," came the steady voice on the other end. "Ethan, it's Ivy Morales." There was a pause. "Ivy, it's been a long time. What can I do for you?" I inhaled deeply. "I need your counsel. It's about my daughter and her husband. He's put her out of her own home. There's abuse, fraud, threats. I have evidence. I need to make it airtight." His tone shifted, sharper, more alert. "Bring me everything you've got. I'll clear my schedule." I felt something lift in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the beginning of it. Ethan had been a fierce attorney in his prime, and though he had slowed down his caseload in recent years, his reputation for integrity and strategy had never faded. He was the one person I trusted to turn this pile of pain into a wall Derek couldn't climb. After ending the call, I returned to the dresser in my room. I pulled open the drawer where my uniform still rested from the night before. I touched the badge again, feeling its weight. This time, I slipped it into my jacket pocket, not for show, not for power, but as a reminder of the authority I once bore and the discipline that still lived within me. When I came back to the table, Layla was watching me, her expression caught between fear and disbelief. "Mom, what are you doing?" "What I was trained to do," I replied. "Gather, record, protect. The badge may not put me on duty anymore, but it gives me the right to certify chain of custody. Everything we have will be beyond dispute. That's how we'll take him down, by leaving no cracks for him to slip through." Her lips trembled. "But he's always been..." untouchable. Everyone believes him. He wears the mask so well. I leaned closer, my voice firm but tender. Masks crack when the truth presses hard enough. We don't need everyone to believe right away. We need the right people to believe. Judges, officers, the community when the veil lifts. And that will happen. She nodded faintly, clinging to my words the way a drowning soul clings to driftwood. I knew belief would come slowly for her, but it didn't need to come quickly. I could carry it for both of us until she was ready. I spent the afternoon sorting files into categories: medical, digital, financial, testimonial. I made duplicate copies on encrypted drives, labeling each with times and dates. Every piece had a place, every step documented. I felt the quiet, strength of order building under my hands. As the sun dipped low, I sat back and exhaled. The house was calm, almost deceptively so, but beneath that calm was resolve. Derek thought his cruelty had silenced Layla. What he didn't know was that it had awakened me. I walked to the window and looked out across the street toward Lydia's house. A light glowed in her kitchen, a reminder of the neighbor who had stood ready without hesitation. Then I looked down at the driveway, at the car that had carried us to the ER, to evidence, to safety. Each place we touched was part of the chain now, part of the story that could no longer be erased. When I returned to the living room, Layla was asleep again, curled beneath the blanket, her breathing softer this time. I pulled the folder closer to me, set my phone on top of it, and whispered into the quiet, "Step 1 complete. Tomorrow, the real work begins." I leaned back, the badge pressing against my chest like a heartbeat, and allowed myself a rare moment of stillness. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. And purpose was enough to carry me into the night. At 2 a.m. the night before, my daughter had been thrown out of her own home. Now, at the close of this day, the evidence stood in our favor, and the plan had taken its first true breath. Night fell again, quiet and deep, but my mind refused to rest. I sat in the living room with the lamp casting a faint circle of light over the table. The folder of evidence was stacked neatly, yet I found my eyes drifting toward the single photograph that lay on top. It wasn't medical paperwork or Lydia's USB drive. It was a picture of the villa, the house Derek now claimed as his own. The photograph was years old, taken on the day Layla's father and I signed the papers. I remembered how his hand trembled slightly as he placed the key into mine, his face proud as if he had carved the place himself. It had been his dream to give our daughter a home that carried both stability and beauty, a home where she could start her own family with a foundation stronger than ours had been. He had called it an anchor, something that would keep her safe no matter how rough the waters of life became. Now that anchor had been stolen. Derek wore it like a crown, parading its worth to his friends and colleagues, claiming it as a testament to his success. But I knew the truth. That villa wasn't his triumph. It was the heart of our family, the last gift of a man who had worked until his hands cracked to provide for his daughter. I closed my eyes and could still see the first time Layla ran across its polished floors, her laughter ringing through the empty rooms. We had eaten pizza straight from the box that night, sitting on the floor because the furniture hadn't yet arrived. My husband and I had clinked glasses, whispering about all the milestones this house would hold: holidays, birthdays, grandchildren's first steps. Those memories should have been untouchable. But Derek's greed had seeped into those walls, staining them with arguments, slammed doors, and whispered lies. He had convinced Layla that his name secured their future, that his control was for her protection. By the time she realized the truth, it was too late. He had already wrapped the villa in forged documents, tangled signatures, and false ownership. As I stared at the photograph, I felt a dull ache in my chest. The house was more than brick and stone. It was the embodiment of trust, of promises made by a man no longer alive to defend them. It was the place where Layla should have found sanctuary, yet it had become the stage of her undoing. I rose quietly and walked into Layla's room. She was asleep again, her face pale but peaceful under the soft lamplight. On the nightstand beside her bed, something caught my eye. A single brass key lying alone, separated from its ring. I picked it up gently, the metal warm from her touch. It was the villa's key, the only thing she had managed to keep when Derek cast her out. I rolled it between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, small yet powerful. Keys open doors, but they also guard them. This one was more than an object. It was a symbol of what had been taken and what could still be reclaimed. I pressed it into my palm and whispered, "He may have the walls, but he doesn't have this. He doesn't have the right." Returning to the living room, I placed the key carefully into the folder alongside the evidence. It belonged there, as much a piece of proof as the bruises, the messages, and the footage. It spoke of possession, of history, of belonging that no forged paper could erase. As the clock crept toward midnight, I found myself standing at the window, staring across the city toward where the villa stood. I could almost see its silhouette against the dark sky, the windows glowing with lights that no longer belonged to us. Derek believed he had claimed victory by filling it with lies and the presence of his mistress, but homes don't bend to deceit forever. The truth was already threading its way back inside, one piece at a time. I thought of my husband then, how he used to place his hand over mine and remind me that justice was rarely swift, but always sure. "Patience, Ivy," he would say. "Justice takes root quietly like seeds in the soil. You won't see them grow at first, but one day they'll crack the ground." The villa was soil poisoned by Derek's greed, but I carried the seeds. And tonight, as I tucked the key away, I knew they had already begun to sprout. When I finally lay down on the couch, exhaustion tugging at me, I whispered into the stillness, "We'll take it back, not just the villa, but everything it means." The words lingered in the air like a vow, binding me to the house, to the promise I had once made, to the daughter I now protected. Sleep claimed me at last, but even in dreams, the villa loomed large. Its halls echoed with both laughter and grief, its doors locked to us for now, but not forever. And in my hand, even in slumber, I still felt the weight of the key, proof that some doors can never truly be closed. The next morning carried a different kind of heaviness. Layla sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in her robe, her face still marked by bruises, but steadier than before. She held her coffee mug with both hands, as if the warmth anchored her. I placed a folder in front of her, and she glanced at it nervously. "What is this?" she asked. "Proof that Derek doesn't own what he claims," I said firmly. "We're going to meet someone who can help us unravel his lies." She frowned. "Mom, Derek has everything in his name. He showed me the papers, the deeds." I cut her off gently. "Papers can be forged, deeds can be manipulated. That's why I trust facts, not faces." By late morning, we walked into the county registry office, the air dry with the scent of paper and ink. Behind the counter stood Mr. Patel, a man with kind eyes and a reputation for meticulous work. He'd been there for decades, and if anyone knew the truth behind property records, it was him. "Ivy," he said warmly, adjusting his glasses when he saw me. "It's been years. What brings you here today?" I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "My daughter's villa. I need you to look at the chain of ownership. Something isn't right." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me the address." Layla hesitated, then recited it quietly. Her voice trembled as if the very mention of the villa stung her. Mr. Patel tapped at his keyboard, the screen reflecting in his lenses. He frowned, leaned closer, then scrolled again. "That's strange," he murmured. "The records show a transfer last year. The property isn't listed under your daughter's name anymore. It's under someone named..." Kendra Sloan. Layla's eyes widened. His mistress, she whispered, her voice breaking. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my voice calm. Can you verify the documentation? Mr. Patel clicked through several screens, then turned the monitor slightly toward us. Here is the deed transfer. It claims your daughter and her husband both signed a quitclaim deed, transferring full ownership to Kendra. But he zoomed in on the scanned signatures. These don't look right. I leaned closer. The scrawled lines meant to be Layla's name were shaky, uneven, nothing like the careful penmanship I had seen her write since childhood, and beside it, a bold, deliberate signature pretending to be mine. Layla gasped, "Mom, they forged yours too." I swallowed hard, steadying her trembling hand beneath the table. "Mr. Patel, are you certain this is what it looks like?" He nodded gravely. "The notary listed here doesn't even exist in our records. That alone is enough to question the validity. But combined with these signatures, I'd call this fraudulent without hesitation." I exhaled, slowly, letting the truth sink in. Derek hadn't just thrown Layla out. He had tried to erase us entirely from the home that was meant to be her legacy. His arrogance had made him sloppy, but his cruelty made him dangerous. Mr. Patel printed copies of the suspicious documents and slid them across the counter. "Keep these. I'll prepare a certified statement confirming what I've found. You'll need this for court." I took the papers carefully, as though they might shatter. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "This may be the first crack in his wall." Layla's hand shook as she held the copies, her eyes wide. "He signed your name. He didn't even hesitate." I turned to her, my voice steady but fierce, because he thought no one would check. He thought intimidation and lies would be enough, but he underestimated us. As we left the office, the autumn wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Layla clutched the papers tightly against her chest. For the first time since that night at 2 a.m., there was something in her eyes besides despair. It wasn't quite hope, but it was the glimmer of it. On the drive home, she whispered, "What if he finds out we're investigating?" I kept my gaze on the road. Then let him. Fear belongs to him now, not to us. We have truth on our side. Back at the house, I added the new documents to the growing file. Medical records, photographs, threatening texts, Lydia's footage, and now fraudulent deeds. Each piece was another weight pressing against Derek's lies. That evening, as Layla rested, I sat at the table again, the lamp casting shadows over the papers. I traced my finger across the forged version of my name. The bold letters mocked me, as if Derek believed he could steal not only our home, but also my identity. He didn't know that with each step, he was leaving a trail too glaring to ignore. I tucked the file into the locked drawer and pressed my hand against it. "You tried to erase us," I murmured, "but you only wrote your own downfall." The villa might still be in his grasp for now, but tonight, for the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath him. The truth had been unearthed, and there was no burying it again. The following afternoon, I drove across town with the folder of evidence on the seat beside me. Layla had begged me not to go, afraid of what Derek might do if he saw me face to face. But this was a step I couldn't skip. Sometimes you have to look the enemy in the eye to remind him you're not afraid. Derek's pawn shop sat on a grimy corner of the boulevard, the kind of place that swallowed up wedding rings, guitars, and desperation. The neon sign flickered faintly, buzzing like an insect as I parked in front. Through the window, I could see two of his men, faces I recognized from neighborhood cookouts, now shadows who followed Derek's orders. I stepped inside, the bell over the door chiming weakly. The smell of dust and old metal clung to the air. Behind the counter, Derek looked up, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled. His smile was slow and sharp, like a blade sliding from a sheath. "Well, if it isn't my dear mother-in-law," he said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Checking in on your daughter? She's been a bit dramatic lately. I placed the folder on the glass counter with deliberate calm. I'm not here for your performance, Derek. I'm here for the truth. His eyes flicked down to the folder, then back up to me. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Truth is whatever people believe, and right now, everyone believes me. I opened the folder and slid out a few pages. The medical report, photographs, the fraudulent deed with his forged signatures. His smugness faltered for the first time as his gaze scanned the papers. You've been busy, he muttered, his jaw tightening. Busy making sure your lies don't bury my daughter, I said evenly. You can charm the church, the neighbors, the league, but the law doesn't care about charm. The law cares about evidence. His men shifted at the back of the room, stepping closer. One of them crossed his arms, the other cracked his knuckles. Derek noticed the movement but didn't stop them. Instead, he smirked, trying to regain his footing. You think walking in here with a few papers makes you strong? Layla was always weak. And you're just an old woman clinging to a badge you don't wear anymore. At that, I reached into my jacket and pulled the badge from my pocket. I set it firmly on the counter between us. The metal gleamed under the dull shop light. The two men hesitated, their swagger deflating. Derek's smirk flickered, betraying the first hint of unease. I may not be on active duty, I said, my voice steady as iron, but I know the rules. Chain of custody, sworn testimony, certified evidence, every bruise on her skin, every forged signature, every threatening message, it all leads back to you. And now your mistress's name is on documents she never signed. Think carefully about how far you want this to go. The men stepped back, exchanging uncertain glances. Derek's expression hardened, but his bravado was thinner now, stretched tight like old fabric ready to tear. He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. She deserved it, Ivy. Someone had to teach her her place. For a moment, the world went still. His words were meant to sting, but they did more than that. They confirmed everything I already knew. He wasn't just cruel in secret. He carried it proudly, convinced no one could touch him. I held his gaze without flinching. Teaching your wife her place doesn't mean bruising her body or forging her legacy. It means you've revealed exactly who you are. And who you are is a man about to lose everything. Silence pressed between us, broken only by the hum of the neon outside. Finally, Derek laughed bitterly, pushing the papers back toward me. Take your little collection, Ivy. Wave it in court if you dare. By then, no one will care. They'll see me as the good husband, the community leader. You'll just look like a bitter old woman pulling strings. I gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into the folder. Then I picked up my badge, tucking it into my pocket with care. We'll see what the judge thinks, I said quietly. As I turned to leave, one of his men muttered, "Boss?" His voice was uncertain, as if even he didn't quite believe Derek's mask anymore. Derek waved him off, his face flushed with anger he couldn't hide. I stepped out into the sunlight, inhaling deeply. My hands trembled faintly, but not from fear, from resolve. I had stood in front of him and made it clear. His reign over my daughter was ending. Driving home, I replayed his words in my head. She deserved it. The arrogance of that sentence would be his undoing, because men like Derek always believed cruelty was invisible. But it leaves marks, and I was collecting every one. When I pulled into the driveway, Layla was waiting at the window, her arms folded, her eyes wide with worry. I smiled faintly and held up the folder as I stepped inside. "It's done," I said simply. Her shoulders sagged with relief, though fear still lingered in her eyes. I set the folder back on the table and smoothed my hand across its surface. Each page inside was a stone, and together they were becoming a fortress. Derek thought the pawn shop was his kingdom, a place where he could sneer and threaten. But today, I walked out knowing it was nothing more than a cage he had built for himself, and soon the bars would close in. The days that followed carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I noticed it first when I stopped by the grocery store. Neighbors who had once greeted me warmly with smiles now turned away, whispering in low voices as I walked past. The cashier who usually asked about Layla barely made eye contact, scanning my items in silence. When I thanked her, she muttered something under her breath I couldn't quite catch. By the time I reached the parking lot, the truth had settled heavy in my chest. Derek had moved faster than I anticipated. He wasn't waiting for the courtroom to defend himself. He was poisoning the well of our community long before we had the chance to drink from it. That Sunday, I walked into church with Layla at my side, her scarf pulled high to cover the fading bruises on her neck. The sanctuary that had once been a place of comfort felt different now. Eyes followed us as we slid into a pew, whispers buzzing louder than the opening hymn. A woman leaned over to another and shook her head. A man we'd known for years narrowed his eyes, clutching his Bible tighter. It didn't take long before the sermon was overshadowed by Derek's carefully crafted mask. He stood at the pulpit afterward, smiling graciously, shaking hands, speaking about generosity and forgiveness. People clapped his back, praised him for his latest charitable donation to a local youth baseball league. He was the image of respectability, the man everyone thought they knew. And we were the shadows in the back pew, the ones painted as bitter, ungrateful, divisive. When we left the church, Layla's steps were small and uncertain. "They believe him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They think I'm lying. They think I left him for no reason." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Let them think what they want for now. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs time. But that night when we returned home, a folded note was wedged into our mailbox. My stomach tightened as I pulled it free, the paper rough beneath my fingertips. In black marker, the words were scrawled with crude urgency. "Shut up or lose your daughter." I stood on the porch, staring at the threat while the crickets chirped around us. Layla stepped out, asking what it was. I slipped the paper into my jacket pocket before she could see. "Just a flyer someone left behind," I lied softly, unwilling to burden her with another weight. She needed hope, not more fear. Inside, when she went to bed, I laid the note flat on the table and photographed it under bright light. Another piece of evidence. Another thread in Derek's web of intimidation. I placed it carefully into the folder, labeling it with the date and time. The next morning, Lydia came by with a basket of muffins, her eyes shadowed with worry. "People are talking," she said quietly, setting the basket down on the counter. "Derek's been telling everyone Layla left him for another man. He's saying you're trying to destroy his reputation because you never liked him. It's spreading fast." I sighed, the words pressing into me like stones. Of course he's twisting it. He knows how to play them. "But I saw the bruises," Lydia said fiercely. "I heard her crying outside your door. I'll tell anyone who asks." I touched her hand gratefully. "And when the time comes, your voice will matter. Right now, let him play his role. The mask will break." That evening, Layla sat by the window, staring out at the villa's silhouette in the distance. Its lights glowed warmly, mocking her. "He's winning," she whispered. "He's got the house, the neighbors, the church. I have nothing." I sat beside her, placing my hand over hers. "You have more than you think. You have the truth, the evidence, and you have me. And sometimes that's all it takes to turn the tide." She shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "It feels like we're already lost." I wanted to tell her otherwise, to paint her a picture of victory, but I knew empty promises would crumble faster than lies. So instead, I leaned close and whispered, "Lost isn't the end. Lost is just the place before found. And I will find justice for you, Layla, even if the whole world looks the other way." Later that night, as she finally drifted into a restless sleep, I stood watch at the window, my eyes tracing the quiet street. Shadows moved here and there, neighbors closing blinds, cars pulling into driveways, but beneath it all was the steady thrum of Derek's influence. He had isolated us, cut us out from the community, tried to cage us in shame. But shame only holds power when you let it silence you. I tightened my grip on the edge of the curtain and whispered to myself, "We are not silent. We are not finished." The note in the folder, the bruises documented, the false deeds exposed, each piece whispered back to me a chorus of truth waiting for its moment to rise. The world outside might have turned its back, but in the stillness of my home, I felt the ember of resolve burning hotter. Derek could spread rumors, he could isolate us, but he could not erase what was real, and soon he would learn that isolation doesn't weaken everyone. Sometimes it forges them into steel. The following week, Derek staged his masterpiece. I could see the preparations from afar, the way the flyers went up on lampposts and the invitations slipped into mailboxes. It was a charity fundraiser, hosted at the community hall, complete with banners about feeding the hungry and supporting local sports. The kind of event people couldn't resist because it made them feel good just to attend. Layla stayed home that evening, still too fragile to face the world that had chosen Derek's smile over her bruises. But I went. I needed to see for myself the lengths he would go to keep his mask polished. The hall was buzzing with chatter when I arrived. Strings of lights hung across the ceiling, soft music playing from a speaker in the corner. Tables overflowed with catered dishes, wine glasses clinking like distant bells, and in the center of it all was Derek, dressed in a crisp suit, his hair slicked neatly back. He moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, laughing, hugging old neighbors. "Such a good man," someone whispered near me. "Can you believe what his wife did to him?" I held my head high, resisting the urge to confront the voice. Instead, I observed, Derek was working the room with precision, leaning down to kiss the forehead of an elderly woman, handing a check to the youth baseball coach, clasping the pastor's hand with humble reverence. Every gesture painted him as the generous husband wronged by a spiteful wife and her bitter mother. He even paused to tell a story, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Layla has been struggling, bless her heart," he said, shaking his head sadly. "I've been doing all I can to keep the villa running, to honor her father's memory, but some people don't appreciate sacrifice." The crowd murmured their sympathy, nodding along, sipping wine. I stood in the corner, my arms crossed, and studied him. The mask fit perfectly tonight, but masks are fragile things. They crack under pressure, and I was gathering the pressure piece by piece. When he spotted me, his smile didn't falter. In fact, it grew wider, smoother, as though my presence added to his performance. He excused himself from a group and walked toward me with open arms. "Ivy," he said warmly, as though we were family united by affection instead of scars. "I didn't expect you here. Come, let me introduce you to the mayor. He's dying to hear stories about your service days." I didn't move. "I'm not here for introductions, Derek. I'm here to watch." He chuckled, leaning in closer so only I could hear. "Watch all you want. They'll never believe you. By the time you wave your little papers around, I'll have every person in this room swearing I'm a saint." His arrogance didn't sting. It fueled me. I let my eyes travel over the smiling faces, the nods of approval, the way people flocked to him like moths to a flame. They were blinded now, but light has a way of burning too brightly, revealing the cracks it once concealed. I turned slightly and caught Lydia at the edge of the crowd. She gave me a small nod, her lips pressed tight. She had come not for the fundraiser, but for me, to let me know I wasn't alone in this sea of false smiles. That silent gesture steadied me more than any word could. Derek lifted a glass, calling for attention. to community, he declared, to loyalty, to love, and to building a future where families thrive. The applause rang out loud, filling the hall. He soaked it in, his grin stretching wider, his mask brighter than ever. But I didn't clap. I didn't raise a glass. I only watched, memorizing the scene. Because one day these same people would see the footage, the bruises, the forged signatures. They would hear Kendra's testimony, the neighbors' recordings, the doctor's words. And when that day came, their applause would curdle into shame. On my way out, Derek caught my arm lightly, still smiling for the benefit of those nearby. "Careful, Ivy," he murmured through clenched teeth. "Push too hard, and you'll find out just how many people stand with me." I met his gaze, calm and steady. "Careful, Derek. Push too far, and you'll find out how quickly masks fall when the truth catches fire." I slipped free of his grasp and walked into the cool night air. The laughter and clinking glasses echoed behind me, but out here, the stars stretched silently across the sky. I breathed deeply, letting the night clear the stench of falsehood from my lungs. Back at home, Layla was curled on the couch, a blanket pulled tight around her. She looked up anxiously when I came in. "How was it?" she asked. I sat beside her and brushed a hand across her hair. "It was exactly what I expected. He put on a show, and they loved it." Her eyes filled with tears, but I shook my head. "Don't let it break you. The higher he builds his mask, the harder it will shatter. And we'll be there when it does." She leaned into me, and for the first time in days, I felt her weight rest fully against my shoulder, no longer braced for the next blow. I held her close, whispering into her hair, "We are not done. He can play his part, but the truth is patient, and when the time comes, it will roar louder than his applause." Outside, the villa's lights glowed in the distance, a reminder of all we had lost. But as I held my daughter, I knew that lights can lie. What mattered wasn't the shine. It was the foundation. And his foundation was already crumbling. The night air was cool when I stepped into the small bar on the edge of town. It wasn't Derek's usual scene, too quiet, too dim for his brand of performance. That was why I chose it. Kendra Sloan sat at a corner table, her hair swept back, her lipstick smudged from too many drinks and not enough sleep. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you want, Ivy?" she asked sharply, crossing her arms. "If Derek finds out we met—" I slid into the chair across from her, calm and steady. "If Derek finds out, he'll do to you what he did to Layla, maybe worse. I think you already know that." Her lips trembled for a second before she smirked, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "He loves me. He promised." I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. The papers inside shifted under the dim light, crisp and undeniable. "He promised you the villa, didn't he? That's why your name is on the deed. But he didn't tell you the signature was forged. He didn't tell you he broke the law to give you something he could never legally own." Kendra's eyes flickered to the folder, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach for it but couldn't bear to touch the truth. "That's not possible. He said Layla signed it over. He said—" I opened the folder and turned the pages toward her. The forged signatures stared back, bold and unmistakable. Next to them was a debt statement, one Derek had taken in her name without her knowledge, stacking bills against the villa as collateral. Her face went pale as she scanned the lines of numbers, the weight of betrayal pressing into her. "He used me," she whispered, the bravado slipping. "He told me we'd build a life together, that the villa was ours." I leaned forward, my voice low but unwavering. "Kendra, you're not the first woman to believe his promises, and you won't be the last if no one stops him. But you have a choice right now. You can keep clinging to his lies, or you can stand with the truth, and the truth is this. If you testify, if you speak up, you'll not only save yourself, but also Layla. You'll expose him for who he is." Her eyes darted around the bar, searching for escape, but there was none. The weight of the papers anchored her, tethered her to the reality she had tried to deny. Her voice cracked when she asked, "And if I don't?" I sat back slowly. "If you don't, Derek will drag you down with him. When the court uncovers the forged deed, your name will be the one tied to it. Your debts, your false ownership, your signature he twisted. He'll leave you holding the wreckage while he slips away to his next conquest. That's who he is." For a long moment, she said nothing. The clink of glasses at the bar filled the silence, the jukebox crooning a melancholy tune. Then she let out a long, shuddering breath and whispered, "I can't believe I let him play me like this." "You wanted to believe," I said softly. "So did Layla. But now you know better. The question is what you'll do with that knowledge." She lifted her eyes to mine, and for the first time they weren't sharp or defensive. They were weary, resigned. "What do you need from me?" "Your testimony," I replied. "Your voice telling the court exactly what he did, and the documents he pushed into your hands, the messages he sent, everything you have that ties him to fraud, to abuse, to lies." Kendra exhaled, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of months had just collapsed onto her at once. "I kept the texts," she admitted. "He used to message me about how he'd teach Layla a lesson. I thought he was just venting. I thought it was passion." She pressed her palms against her forehead. "God, I was such a fool." I reached across the table and rested my hand lightly on hers. Being fooled isn't the same as being guilty. What matters is what you do now. If you're brave enough to tell the truth, you'll help tear down the mask he's hiding behind. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it. I'll testify." Relief coursed through me, not triumph, but something steadier, something that felt like progress. For the first time, Derek's fortress had sprung a leak from within. When I left the bar that night, I carried not just the folder of documents, but also the knowledge that the tide was shifting. Derek had built his power on deception and intimidation, but one by one, those he used were beginning to see the truth. Back at home, Layla sat up when I walked through the door, her face lined with worry. "Where did you go?" she asked. I placed the folder on the table and sat beside her. "I spoke to Kendra." Her eyes widened. "His mistress?" "Not anymore," I said firmly. "She's ready to tell the truth." Layla's breath caught, and for the first time, a flicker of hope sparked in her expression. I pulled the villa key from the folder and set it on the table between us. He may think he owns everything, but he doesn't own the truth, and now the truth is on our side. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I sat with my daughter in the quiet, the air between us lighter than it had been in weeks. Justice was still far ahead, but tonight I knew we had taken another step closer. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, a place where truth and lies often clashed under the same roof. I walked through its tall doors with Layla at my side, her steps hesitant but steadier than the week before. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pinned back to hide the fading bruises. Her fingers gripped mine as if to anchor herself, and I squeezed gently, reminding her she wasn't walking in alone. Ethan Cole was already waiting inside, his briefcase balanced neatly on the bench beside him. He rose when he saw us, his eyes filled with calm determination. "Ivy," he greeted, nodding respectfully. "Layla, today we start taking back what's yours." Layla managed a faint smile, but I could feel the tremor in her hand. We followed Ethan into the courtroom, where the walls rose high and solemn, and every sound seemed to echo. Judge Arturo Ramirez presided from the bench, his stern expression unreadable. On the opposite side, Derek sat with his lawyer, Hector Valdez. Derek wore a dark suit, his hair gleaming under the lights, the picture of respectability. He looked at me and smiled, a performance meant for everyone else in the room. When the proceedings began, Valdez wasted no time spinning Derek's story. He painted Layla as unstable, emotional, prone to exaggeration. He described Derek as a faithful husband, a community leader, a man who had sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of his wife's fragile state. The words were slick, rehearsed, each one crafted to charm the gallery of onlookers. But when Ethan stood, the room shifted. His voice was steady, his words sharp as a blade. He began by laying out the chain of evidence. The medical report signed by Dr. Vega, the photographs of Layla's bruises, the threatening text messages Derek had sent. He spoke of the fraudulent deed, pointing out the forged signatures and the non-existent notary, each piece stacked upon the last, building a wall of truth too solid to ignore. Then Lydia Grant was called. She stepped up with quiet dignity, her voice unwavering as she described what her cameras had recorded at 2:01 a.m. The footage played on the screen, grainy but damning. Layla pounding on my door, sobbing, begging for safety. The sound filled the courtroom, cutting through the practiced smiles and polished words. I felt Layla's hand tremble in mine, but I held her steady, whispering, "They hear you now." Valdez tried to object, to dismiss the footage as unreliable, but Judge Ramirez silenced him with a firm wave. The evidence spoke too clearly. Finally, the moment came for Kendra. She walked to the stand in a fitted blazer, her expression tight, her voice low at first but gathering strength with every sentence. She confessed how Derek had lured her with promises, how he had used her name on forged documents, how he had boasted that Layla deserved what she got. She even read aloud the texts he had sent, his cruelty laid bare for all to hear. Derek shifted uneasily, his mask cracking under the weight of her testimony. He leaned toward Valdez, whispering furiously, but there was no unhearing the words. The room had heard them, the judge had heard them, and Layla had heard them. When Ethan cross-examined Derek, the veneer finally slipped. At first, Derek kept his smile, answering smoothly, but Ethan pressed harder, laying one piece of evidence against the other until contradictions began to surface. Derek's charm faltered, his voice sharpened, and finally his temper flared. He slammed a hand against the table, shouting, "She was weak! She needed to be put in her place!" The words hung in the air, thick and damning. Silence swept through the courtroom, broken only by the scratching of the judge's pen. Derek's face paled as he realized too late that the mask had shattered in front of the very people he had sought to charm. I watched him then, my heart steady. This was the man who had thought himself untouchable, who had believed fear could silence us. But fear had become our weapon, turned against him by the weight of truth. Layla looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, not of despair this time, but of release. "Mom," she whispered, "they see him now." I nodded, my voice barely a murmur. "Yes, they do." The rest of the day blurred into motions and arguments, but the tide had turned. The judge had seen enough, and though the final verdict was yet to come, I knew we had broken Derek's facade. When court adjourned for the day, Ethan closed his briefcase with a satisfied nod. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we'll finish this." I walked out of the courthouse with Layla's arm linked in mine, the late afternoon sun spilling across the steps. For the first time since that knock at 2 a.m., the air felt lighter. We were not done yet, but we were no longer walking in shadows. The truth had stepped into the light, and Derek could not chase it back. The second day in court carried a weight, unlike any other. Layla and I walked through the courthouse doors with Ethan beside us, the folder of evidence secured under his arm. I could feel the tremor in my daughter's body as she matched her steps with mine, but there was also a steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She had faced the whispers, the doubt, the shame. Now she was ready to face judgment. The courtroom was full. Neighbors, church members, and curious onlookers filled the benches, their eyes flicking between Derek and Layla as though measuring who carried the stronger story. Derek sat in his press suit, his lawyer Valdez whispering sharply in his ear, but his face no longer wore the calm mask of yesterday. The cracks had spread. He looked restless, the veins at his temple pulsing, his charm slipping like a costume that no longer fit. Judge Ramirez entered, his robe flowing as he settled into his seat. The gavel struck, and silence rippled across the room. Ethan rose first, delivering his closing remarks with a precision honed by decades in the courtroom. He reminded the judge of every layer of evidence, the medical records documenting Layla's injuries, the photos that showed the truth her scarf tried to hide, the threatening messages Derek had sent, the fraudulent deed, the footage captured at 2:01 a.m., and finally the testimony of Kendra Sloan. He ended simply, his voice firm but quiet. "Your Honor, this is not a case about a marriage unraveling. This is about power abused, trust betrayed, and a home stolen. My client deserves protection, dignity, and the restoration of what is rightfully hers." When Valdez stood, his tone was sharper than the day before. He accused Layla of exaggerating, of conspiring with her mother to ruin Derek. He called Kendra's testimony the bitter revenge of a scorned woman. He tried to dismiss the footage, discredit the documents, twist the meaning of the texts. His words were frantic, layered with desperation, but every denial seemed smaller in the face of the evidence stacked against him. Finally, Judge Ramirez leaned forward. His voice was deep and steady, carrying through the room. "I have considered the evidence, the testimony, and the arguments presented. The facts are clear." He paused, and the silence grew thick, everyone holding their breath. "The court finds in favor of Layla Morales. The villa is to be returned to her name immediately. The forged documents are null and void. Furthermore, given the evidence of threats, fraud, and abuse, Derek Whitford is remanded into custody for further criminal proceedings." The gavel struck again, sharp and final. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Then Layla gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. She turned to me, her face crumpling with relief. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly as her sobs shook her shoulders. Across the room, Derek leapt to his feet, shouting protests, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over. You can't do this to me." Officers moved quickly, restraining him as he thrashed, his polished image shattered for all to see. His neighbors, his admirers, the very people he had fooled for so long, watched in stunned silence as the man they thought they knew revealed his true face. Kendra sat in the gallery, her eyes wet but her chin lifted. She met my gaze and gave the smallest nod, as though to say, "We did it." Lydia clasped her hands together, whispering a prayer under her breath. Even Dr. Vega, who had come to hear the verdict, smiled faintly, her eyes soft with vindication. When Derek was finally led out in handcuffs, the murmurs in the courtroom swelled. Some whispered in disbelief, others in shame for having believed him. The mask of respectability he had worn so carefully had collapsed entirely, leaving only the truth behind. I looked at Layla, who still clung to me, her tears wetting my shoulder. "It's over," I whispered, stroking her hair. "He can't hurt you anymore." She pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes wide and trembling. "Mom, we got the villa back. We actually did it." "Yes," I said softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We did." As we walked out of the courthouse, the autumn sun warmed our faces. For the first time in weeks, the air felt different, cleaner, freer, as though the weight pressing down on us had finally lifted. Layla stood a little taller, her hand gripping mine firmly, not out of fear but out of strength. Ethan joined us on the steps, his expression both tired and satisfied. "It's not the end of Derek's legal troubles," he said, "but for you, it's a new beginning. Guard it well." I thanked him quietly, the gratitude too deep for words. Layla turned her face to the sky, the light catching her features in a way that reminded me of her father. I could almost hear his voice whispering that the promise had been kept, that our daughter was safe again. We descended the courthouse steps slowly, the chatter of the crowd buzzing behind us. But none of it mattered anymore. The verdict was ours. The villa was restored, and Derek was no longer free to torment us. As we reached the bottom, Layla slipped her arm through mine and whispered, "Let's go home, Mom." I nodded, my heart swelling with both relief and resolve. Home was waiting, and this time, no one would take it from us. The villa stood quiet when we pulled into the driveway that evening. The late sun spilled golden light across its white walls, the shutters glowing like embers after a storm. For a long moment, Layla didn't move. She sat in the passenger seat staring at the house that had once been hers, that had been twisted into a prison and now restored by the gavel of justice. Her hands shook slightly, her breath uneven. I turned off the engine and placed the small brass key into her palm. The same key she had clutched the night Derek threw her out. The same key she had carried like a fragment of hope when everything else was stripped away. "It's yours," I whispered. Layla stared down at it as though it were both treasure and burden. Her lips parted, but no words came. She closed her fingers around it slowly, the metal pressing into her skin, grounding her. "Come on," I said gently, stepping out of the car. We walked together up the path, the gravel crunching softly under our shoes. The front door loomed ahead, tall and familiar. Layla paused at the threshold, her shoulders rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I can't," she murmured. "I don't know if I can do this." I placed a steady hand on her back. "You can. You're not walking in alone." She nodded faintly, then raised her trembling hand. The key slid into the lock, and for a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then the door clicked open with the softest sound, a sound that carried the weight of years, of battles fought and promises kept. As the door swung inward, the familiar scent of wood and stone drifted out. Layla stepped inside, her eyes sweeping over the foyer. The walls, the staircase, the chandelier, each detail carried echoes of laughter and love, but also shadows of shouting and slammed doors. She pressed a hand to her mouth as tears spilled freely. "It feels different," she whispered. "It's the same house, but it doesn't feel the same." "Because now it's yours again," I said softly. "Not his, not theirs, yours." She walked slowly through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of picture frames, the cool marble of the kitchen counter. Every step seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders, though her tears kept flowing. In the living room, she stopped abruptly and turned to me, holding out the key. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't deserve this. I let him take everything. I let him make me believe I was nothing." I closed her fingers gently back around the key. "Listen to me. He took what wasn't his, but you didn't give it willingly. You were lied to, manipulated, hurt. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What matters is that you're here now, standing, reclaiming what belongs to you. You deserve this more than anyone." She collapsed into my arms then, sobbing into my shoulder. I held her tightly, stroking her hair the way I had when she was a child afraid of the dark. "You're safe," I whispered. "You're home." When her tears finally subsided, we stood together in the quiet. The villa no longer felt like Derek's domain. It felt like a place waiting to breathe again. Layla walked to the front door, pressed her hand against the wood, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she turned, her eyes red but steady. "This is ours," she said firmly. I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. Yes, and no one will ever take it again. We spent the evening cleaning, dusting, opening windows to let fresh air chase out the stale remnants of Derek's presence. Lydia stopped by with flowers, placing them on the kitchen table, her eyes shining with joy. "It looks right again," she said, "like it's been waiting for you." As night fell, Layla stood once more in the foyer, the key in her hand. She looked at me, tears glistening, but her smile fragile and real. When he threw me out, I thought I lost everything, but standing here now, I realize I still had you, and that was enough to bring me back. I pulled her into my arms again, whispering, "Your father wanted this house to be your sanctuary. Tonight, it is again." She nodded, clutching the key tightly as though it were both shield and sword. The brass gleamed in the lamplight, no longer a lonely remnant but a symbol restored. That night, as I watched her drift into sleep in her own bedroom, the house seemed to exhale. The walls felt lighter, the silence softer. And in my heart, I knew we had not only won a villa, we had reclaimed dignity, memory, and home. The villa was quiet again, but this time it was not the silence of abandonment or fear. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the air is washed clean and the earth drinks deeply. I moved through the hall slowly, my hand brushing over the familiar walls, my steps echoing softly. Every corner seemed to breathe with memory, the weight of the past mingling with the promise of tomorrow. Layla was asleep upstairs, her face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. For the first time in months, her brow wasn't furrowed, her shoulders weren't tense. She had reclaimed something no court order could fully give her, the right to rest without fear. Watching her drift into that peace filled me with a quiet joy I could hardly put into words. I walked into the study and opened the drawer where I kept a small wooden box. Inside were keepsakes of a life I had once shared with my husband, his old watch, a photo of us on our wedding day, and a folded slip of paper yellowed with time. On that slip, in his handwriting, were the words he had spoken to me so many years ago. "Promise me you'll never let our daughter stand alone." I lifted the paper gently, my hands trembling. Memories of him rushed back, the way his laugh filled a room, the smell of sawdust on his clothes after a long day of carpentry, the way his eyes softened when he looked at Layla. I remembered the night he pressed this promise into me, how I swore to him with every fiber of my being that I would keep it. Now, standing in the villa he had worked so hard to leave behind for our daughter, I knew I had fulfilled that vow. It hadn't been easy. It had nearly broken me to watch Layla suffer, to see her spirit crushed by the man who was supposed to protect her. But tonight, with the house returned, with Derek in custody, I could finally whisper the words I had carried for years. "I kept it," I said softly into the empty room, as though he were standing right beside me. "She is safe. She is not alone." The words steadied me, settling into my bones like an anchor. I pressed the slip of paper to my chest and closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his presence in the silence. Later, I stepped outside into the garden, the night air cool against my face. The villa's windows glowed warmly behind me, no longer a fortress of cruelty, but a beacon of renewal. I sat on the old stone bench he had built years ago, running my hand across its rough surface. The stars stretched wide above, endless and steady, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to exhale without the weight of dread pressing against me. Footsteps approached softly. Layla, wrapped in a blanket, walked out to join me. She sat close, leaning her head against my shoulder. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us was enough. Finally, she whispered, "Do you ever think Dad knows? That he sees all of this? I looked up at the stars, their light older than our grief, older than our victories. I believe he does, I answered. I believe he's proud of you, of us, of the way we stood. Her hand tightened around mine, and I felt the strength in her grip. She wasn't the broken woman Derek had cast out at 2 a.m. She was someone new, wounded but healing, fragile, yet stronger than she had ever realized. She turned to me, her eyes glistening. You never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself. I kissed her forehead softly. That's what love is, Layla. That's what family is. And your father's promise lives in both of us now. The night deepened, crickets singing softly in the grass. We sat there until the chill settled into our bones, then rose together and went back inside. I watched her climb the stairs, pausing halfway to look back at me with a small smile. I think I'm finally ready to live here again, she said. Those words pierced me with both relief and gratitude. Then this house is truly home again, I replied. When I finally lay down in my own bed, I held the slip of paper one last time before placing it back into the box. My husband's words no longer felt like a burden or a test. They felt like a circle finally closed. I whispered into the dark, I kept it. She is safe. And with that, I allowed myself to sleep. Not the restless half-sleep of vigilance, but the deep, peaceful kind that comes when a promise has been fulfilled. That night, I woke suddenly, not to pounding fists on the door or the sound of shattering glass, but to silence. I sat up in bed, blinking in the dark, the red digits of the clock glowing 2:00 a.m., the same hour that had once marked the collapse of my daughter's world. My breath caught as I listened. No knock, no desperate voice, only the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint rustle of leaves against the window. For a long moment, I simply sat there, letting the quiet seep into me. My body remembered the shock of that first night, the fear, the urgency, the way Layla's body had gone limp in my arms. But now, instead of panic, there was peace. I rose from the bed and moved softly through the house, my bare feet gliding over the cool floorboards. I stopped by Layla's door and pushed it open just enough to see her. She was curled beneath the covers, her breathing slow and steady. The moonlight spilled across her face, illuminating skin no longer shadowed by fresh bruises. She looked younger in her sleep, almost like the girl she had once been, unburdened by betrayal. Leaning against the door frame, I let myself watch her for a while. A mother always knows the difference between a child sleeping in fear and a child sleeping in safety. Tonight, she slept in safety. That was enough. I padded down the hallway to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the table where our folder of evidence still rested. The papers were neat and secure, their job nearly done. They had carried us through the battle brick by brick until the truth became undeniable. I ran my hand over the folder, then closed it firmly. For the first time, I felt I could put it away without fear that silence would erase what we had built. The villa felt different now. It was no longer Derek's trophy or his weapon. It was ours again, breathing softly like a house relieved to be lived in, with love instead of control. The shadows along the walls seemed gentler, the silence no longer threatening. I walked into the living room and sank onto the couch, the same place where Layla had collapsed that terrible night. I could almost see the ghost of that moment, the way she had whispered about being thrown out, the way she had shivered as I wrapped her in a blanket. But that ghost faded quickly, replaced by the memory of her standing in the foyer with the key in her hand, claiming her home again. Outside, the world was still. The street lamp glowed faintly, and the garden was silver with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then silence reclaimed the night. It was as if the universe itself was marking the hour, acknowledging the circle that had closed. I leaned back and whispered into the quiet, "We made it through." It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something deeper, a release. The release of a vow fulfilled, a daughter protected, a home restored. The release of knowing that at 2 a.m., when fear once ruled, there was now nothing but peace. I thought of my husband then. I imagined him standing in the garden, smiling faintly, proud of the promise kept. "She's safe," I whispered to him. "She's truly safe." The clock clicked to 2:15. Still no knock, still no collapse. Just silence, tender and unbroken. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to breathe deeply, to trust the quiet rather than fear it. When I finally rose from the couch, I turned off the kitchen light and made my way back to bed. Layla stirred faintly in her room as I passed, murmuring something in her dreams, but her face was calm. I pressed my hand lightly against her doorframe, a small ritual of protection, before retreating to my own room. Sliding under the covers, I felt the kind of tired that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from release. For weeks I had carried the weight of vigilance, always listening for the next threat, always watching for the next wound. Tonight, at 2 a.m., I carried nothing but gratitude. The villa settled around me, the walls no longer echoing with fear, but with the promise of healing. My eyes drifted shut, and the silence cradled me like an old friend. At 2 a.m., once the hour of despair, I finally found peace. Morning sunlight spilled across the villa's kitchen, warm and golden, painting the countertops in gentle light. For the first time in months, the house felt alive. I awoke to the smell of something faintly sweet and familiar. When I walked down the stairs, I found Layla standing by the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot. The tune caught me immediately. It was the same lullaby I used to sing to her when she was small, the one my husband had teased me about because I could never quite hold the notes. But Layla loved it. She would curl against me, eyes fluttering shut, her breath slowing in rhythm with the song, and now here she was, singing it back into the air as if pulling a piece of her childhood into the present. I stopped at the doorway, my throat tightening. Her voice was shaky at first, but steadying with every note. She glanced over her shoulder and caught me watching. Instead of stopping, she smiled faintly and kept singing. "Good morning," I managed, my voice thick. "Morning," she said softly. "I thought I'd try cooking breakfast, the way Dad used to make it on Sundays." She lifted a spoon, blew on it, and offered me a taste. It was simple oatmeal, but somehow it tasted like more, like memory, like home. I closed my eyes, savoring it. "Perfect," I whispered. Her laughter was quiet but genuine, and in that sound I heard healing. Not finished, not complete, but begun. As we sat at the table, bowls steaming before us, Lydia knocked on the back door and stepped in, carrying a basket of fresh fruit. "I thought you could use these," she said warmly. Her eyes softened as she looked around the kitchen, the sunlight, the scent of food, the hum of Layla's song still lingering in the air. "It feels different here already." Layla blushed faintly but lifted her chin. "It's ours again," she said. "I want to fill it with the things that make it feel alive." Lydia set the basket down and gave her a hug. "That's the spirit. You've been through the fire, Layla. Now you get to decide what rises from the ashes." We spent the morning together, eating, laughing lightly, sharing small stories that stitch the broken edges back together. At one point, Layla drifted into another verse of the lullaby, and Lydia joined softly, her voice harmonizing in a way that made the kitchen glow even brighter. I closed my eyes for a moment, tears slipping free. Not of sorrow this time, but of release. That song, born of sleepless nights and whispered promises, now floated back into the air as a hymn of return. After Lydia left, Layla and I carried our bowls to the sink. She looked at me, her eyes shining. When he threw me out, I thought I'd lost my voice. I thought I'd never sing again. But now, I feel like I can breathe, like I can remember who I was before him. I touched her cheek gently. You were never lost, Layla. Just waiting. And now you've found your way back. The rest of the day was spent opening windows, shaking out curtains, and letting the autumn breeze move freely through the house. Layla sang as she worked, sometimes humming, sometimes breaking into laughter when she forgot the words. I followed her from room to room, each note wrapping around us like threads, binding the house back together. As evening fell, we lit candles in the living room. Layla sat at the old piano, dusting the keys before pressing down tentatively. The notes came haltingly at first, then steadier. She began to play the lullaby, her fingers remembering more than her mind. I sat beside her, humming along until the words slipped out of me, rough but true. Together, our voices rose, shaky but strong, weaving across the chords. When the final note faded, Layla leaned against me, her tears wetting my sleeve. I think we're going to be okay, Mom, she whispered. I kissed her hair, my heart full. We already are. The villa, once a place of fear, now pulsed with warmth. The silence that had once crushed us was gone, replaced by music, by laughter, by a song of return. And in that moment, I knew this was more than a victory. It was a beginning,